So happy Thanksgiving to those viewers of mine who celebrate, and to those of you who don't. If you're not familiar with the particular intricacies of this specific American holiday, just know that it's an opportunity for family and friends to gather around a table and eat good food and engage in kinship and camaraderie. And it's also an unlikely forum to litigate personal political disagreements that have probably been long simmering. And to that end, President Biden's reelection campaign released your handy guide for responding to crazy MAGA nonsense this Thanksgiving. But before we unpack all that, if you haven't yet, please hit that like, subscribe, and the alert bell. All right, so I didn't think I was going to cover something like this, but I was scrolling through Twitter this morning, and I thought it was hilarious, and I thought it was very apropos. It was very appropriate for the time. So I was like, you know what, let's do a video about this, because why not? It's funny. So literally, President Biden's Twitter reelection account, the Biden-Harris HQ, they put out literally your handy guide for responding to crazy MAGA nonsense this Thanksgiving. And again, for those of you who don't celebrate, Thanksgiving is like a hilariously unlikely forum, but very popular for people to get into political arguments. I grew up in a red rural state, and I've talked about this in previous videos. I have family members and friends who are not only conservative, not only Republican, but are part of the MAGA movement. And I love them and I cherish them, but we intensely disagree politically. I think that they've been misled. I think they've been radicalized. I think they've been victimized by Donald Trump and Republican Party leaders. And so there's the temptation for these things to come out. And of course, they think that, I've been radicalized by communist, Marxist, socialist Joe Biden. So it makes for interesting tension over dinner. So with that in mind, let's break this down one by one. The first slide. This is the claim. The economy was better under Trump. And this guide points out wrong. Trump had the worst job record of any president since the Great Depression, which is true. Inflation is the lowest it's been in 2 years. The economy is growing. Unemployment has been under 4% for the longest stretch on record. So let's talk about this. Inflation is still relatively high, right? But it's a global phenomenon. Joe Biden is not responsible for inflation going on in Germany and the United Kingdom. It's a global phenomenon in response to the COVID pandemic. You can't lay that at the feet of Joe Biden. If you want to say, American spending packages, legislation, there was a lot of spending under Donald Trump. As a matter of fact, Donald Trump deficit spent every 4 years, each of the 4 years that he was in office. He contributed 25% of America's national debt after promising to wipe it out. So if you want to blame inflation on American spending, then Donald Trump gets some of the blame too, at least as much as Joe Biden does. So it's probably not a good argument for your MAGA friends and family to make. But inflation has steadily declined. Okay, we have seen a decline year over year, which is good. We're slowly but surely making progress there. And by the way, the progress that we're making with inflation in the United States is better than any other advanced economy on earth. The United Kingdom, France, Germany, other advanced G7 nations are not dealing with inflation nearly as well as we are. So there's still more work to be done. There's legitimate pains to address, but it is getting better. And they point out that Joe Biden has created nearly 14 million jobs. It's true. And even if you're so inclined to not count COVID recovery, I don't see why we should grant you that consideration, because you certainly wouldn't grant that consideration if the shoe was on the other foot. But even if we control for that, Joe Biden has created more jobs on average than Donald Trump. It's a fact. So the next one, Trump's going to protect our Social Security and Medicare. And again, are you kidding me? Trump tried to cut Social Security and Medicare every year he was in office, every single year. And while he did that, he cut taxes for his super rich friends. They're referring to the 2017 Tax and Jobs Act, okay? And it did hit like 80% of the tax cut benefits went to the 1%, like the highest earners who don't need that tax relief, right? The people who need tax relief the most are middle and lower class Americans, but the lion's share went to those who need it the least. And that's what Trump did. Trump secured our border. No, he didn't. All he did was separate families, put children in cages, and leave behind a broken immigration system for Joe Biden to clean up. Now, if he's reelected, he's promising to make it worse, rounding up Latinos into mass detention camps, ending birthright citizenship, and shooting people at will. Let's talk about that first part first, which is the immigration system. Now, listen, Republicans are able to effectively wield this as a cudgel against President Biden, as we've talked about in previous videos. They're very good at it. But here's the thing. Immigration has been a challenge for both Republican and Democratic administrations for decades. It's been a challenge under Biden. It was a challenge under Trump, challenge under Obama, challenge under Bush, because the chief executive, the president, is limited in what he or she can do. They can enforce policy, but they can't craft legislation. That's up to Congress, and Congress bipartisanly has failed to address comprehensive immigration reform. So that's simply a fact. And I'll also remind everybody that Border Patrol manpower, Border Patrol resources, Border Patrol policies are virtually identical under Biden as they were under Trump. It's simply a fact, okay? The fact that immigration, or that we're having additional contacts at the border, we're reporting record, arrests and stuff like that. So that means that the border is not open. It means that Border Patrol under Joe Biden is actually doing its jobs and, interdicting these unlawful, illegal, undocumented contacts at the border, okay? But if you want more than that, if you want, to stem the flow, that's when Congress, both Republicans and Democrats, need to act. You can't blame it all on Joe Biden. There's no federal ban on abortion. You can still get one. What's the big deal? They point out, not in the 21 states that currently have bans in place. MAGA Republicans running for president would push for a federal abortion ban if elected. Trump has endorsed a federal ban and said there should be punishment for women who have... Oh, you know what? I'm sorry. Let me go back. I'm sorry. I meant to talk about this other part about the immigration thing. So when they talk about that he's promising to make it worse, it's true. We talked about this in a previous video. Part of Donald Trump's sweeping fascistic plans, if he's reelected, are mass deportations and giant detention camps. Truly scary. So according to sources, as part of Project 2025, Trump wants to revive his first-term border policies, including banning entry by people from certain Muslim-majority nations, reimposing a COVID-19 era policy of refusing asylum claims, though this time he would base that on refusal on assertions that migrants carry other infectious diseases. So he, instead of saying COVID would be the predicate, he's just going to say that these particular migrants are disease-ridden, vermin, as he often refers to people with whom he disagrees. He plans to scour the country for unauthorized immigrants and deport people by the millions per year. This would be an exorbitant taxpayer expense. It would be a humanitarian crisis. It would be absolutely cruel. Absolutely no need for it. Absolutely fascistic. So, sorry, getting back to the abortion ban thing. Trump has endorsed an abortion ban and said there should be punishment for women who had an abortion. 100% true. And Donald Trump actually was the only candidate, I think, running in 2016 who said it. He's like, listen, if we're going to outlaw abortion, if we're going to punish abortion, then by necessity we have to punish women who pursue the right to an abortion. It was very draconian. It was very cruel, but that's what Donald Trump thinks about it. In terms of what he's said recently, there's this.
However, there, of course, remains a vital role for the federal government in protecting unborn life.
So dude is clearly signaling that if given the opportunity, he will sign what his base wants, not what the vast majority of Americans want, but what his radical base wants, which is a federal abortion ban. Trump is better for workers. Well, he pretends to be, but then he lies to their faces. Trump promised no factories when jobs would come back. Then he cut taxes for rich people, shipped jobs overseas, and factories were forced to shutter 100%. Under the Trump administration, America lost more manufacturing jobs than gained. It was a net loss, okay? So he actually allowed more jobs to be shipped overseas than were generated domestically. 100% true. Whereas President Biden is the most pro-union president in history. I think most people agree with that, even if they're not happy to the extent to which he's been pro-union, even if they think it's insufficient. Even his harshest critics on the very far progressive left would say, yeah, Joe Biden is more pro-union than any of his immediate predecessors in modern history. And under the Biden administration, 800,000 manufacturing jobs have been created. And then they conclude, they don't conclude, they go on to say that world leaders respected Trump and the world was safer. And again, that's not true. Poll after poll after poll after poll, internationally conducted, show that the rest of the world respects the United States and considers President Biden to be a more temperate and responsible leader than Donald Trump, who was widely seen as a buffoon. He was indeed laughed at. I mean, when he gave a speech at the United Nations, everyone in attendance laughed at him audibly. Joe Biden has never been laughed at in that respect by world leaders who take him seriously. He negotiated with the Taliban, sent love letters to Kim Jong-un while letting him and Iran pursue nukes and doing nothing to push back on Chinese aggression. And he's repeatedly praised these foreign autocrats, Vladimir Putin, Xi Jinping, Kim Jong-un. He praises these foreign brutal autocrats much more than he praises his fellow Americans. Think about what he says about Joe Biden or Democrats or people who disagree with him or criticize him. He calls them all sorts of names, vermin, stupid. He insults their looks. But he gives effuse praise to foreign autocrats. It's disgusting. It's indefensible. It's objectively wrong. And if Joe Biden or a Democrat ever did anything like that, if they were talking smack about Republicans or conservatives, about being that they were vermin or disgusting or despicable, while praising Putin and Xi Jinping and Kim Jong-un, the Republican Party would be freaking out. So if it's not okay for Joe Biden to do it, it's not okay for Donald Trump to do it. End of story. And then, of course, when they're talking about the Taliban, we're talking about the deal, the disastrous deal that he made to withdraw from Afghanistan. He cut the Afghan government out, dealt directly with the Taliban. And yeah, he took us out of the Iran nuclear deal. And now, as a result, Iran's nuclear program is more advanced now than it ever was. So Trump failed in that respect as well. And then they say Trump's winning in the polls. And then, this one, is a bit self-serving. They're talking about, listen, okay, Joe Biden is struggling in the polls, but so did previous presidents. It's not the end of the story. And it's not. But it's also not good either, I will say. We're a year out. Things can change. But the rest of that guide, in particular, heavily fact-based, pretty much inarguable. There's no question about it. It's stuff that we've talked about on this channel before. Right now, the American people, and really not the American people, but just society as a whole, internationally, we have a very low attention span. We have extremely short-term memory, and we are prone to recency bias and revisionist history and rose-tinted glasses, right? There's no question that things are not perfect under Joe Biden. There's no question that we as President Biden's constituents, his citizens, don't have an obligation to continue to push and nudge and demand more from him and demand better from him. But by all objective accounts, Joe Biden has been an infinitely superior president, both morally and as a matter of policy, than Donald Trump. He's smarter than Donald Trump. He's more educated than Donald Trump. He's more experienced than Donald Trump. He has better judgment than Donald Trump. He's more respected by world leaders than Donald Trump. He's better on the economy than Donald Trump. He's better on domestic policy than Donald Trump. Donald Trump is inferior in all ways, unless you count, number of affairs and number of lies told and stuff like that. And then, of course, Trump is much better. So, in case you haven't had your Thanksgiving meal with your family and friends yet, you can refer to this guide or watch this video or even play this video. Throw it up on the screen. I'm happy to piss off your Republican and conservative family members and friends. It's a rite of passage. It's fun. It makes the food sweeter. But all kidding aside, enjoy Thanksgiving. Leave a comment if you have any feedback. Would definitely love to hear your thoughts, especially even how you're celebrating your Thanksgiving with respect to politics. Let me know what you think in the comments.